The ancient Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife. No other culture on earth went through such great lengths to prepare for what they believed happened after death. No matter what museum you attend, visitors and tourists always seem to congregate the most in the Egyptian section to get a look at how this culture treated death. They would build expensive tombs and coffins, and funerary texts written in hieratic, demotic and hieroglyphic that recorded what they believed was on the other side. The coffins were adorned in different colors from top, bottom, middle, inside, outside, and sometimes the very features of the dead was carved on the front. Many gave homage to their dead mummified relatives, and every detail of their belief was even taken with them inside of their coffins, where they would also make special spices to embalm them, and the dead remains, including their organs, were safely put into a jar, where it was believed that according to the Book of the Dead, their heart was weighed in the balance where their fate would be decided. But as modern research is discovering, underneath these expensive, highly colored, elaborate coffins and tombs, the ancient Egyptians were no different to us, the people of the 21st century. They suffered the same diseases. An Egyptian coffin was discovered, and inside was the remains of a young male. The discovery was quite shocking, for people of his class either couldn't afford or were not in the privileged class to have such coffins. His name was Nakt, according to the deciphering of the Egyptian text on his coffin. But when an autopsy was performed on this mummy, some interesting results were discovered. In a book titled Mummies, Disease and Ancient Cultures, 3 authors who were investigating the diseases of cultures of the ancient world discovered the importance of a right diet and the effect it has on our well-being. It reads, a male named Nakt was a person of the laboring class and was far more representative of the great mass of the ancient population than most mummies, which tend to be from the aristocracy. The post-mortem examination of this 3,200-year-old mummy of a teenage Egyptian boy revealed a variety of disease processes. Trichinella infection like cystic cercosis is caused by eating inadequately cooked pork, and this with other findings suggests that Nakt ate pork. Today, cysticercosis and other parasitic diseases transmitted by pigs are virtually non-existent because of strict religious dietary laws. When you follow the principles of the health laws in the Bible, it protects you against the diseases of Egypt. But the more people either reject or misunderstand biblical texts, they continue the same cycle of the ancient Egyptians. Today, the same parasitic worms that invade your brain is caused by people eating pork. And when a woman was receiving headaches and thought that she had a brain tumor, it was discovered that she ate a pork taco and she had a parasitic worm in her brain, and it had caused neurocystic cercosis, the same parasitic disease that the ancient Egyptians had because of their consumption of pork. And studies have shown from the World Health Organization that tapeworm infection of the central nervous system is a leading cause of epilepsy worldwide. Neurocystic cercosis is a preventable parasitic infection of the central nervous system and is caused by the pork tapeworm Tiana solium. Herodotus, the 5th century BC Greek historian, has been an asset in helping us understand the cultures of the ancient world that included the ancient Egyptians. And in his keen observations, he observed that pigs played a role in that North African culture. He recorded that the only deities to whom the Egyptians consider it proper to sacrifice pigs are Dionysius and the moon. And when you look on Egyptian tombs and temples, you see that the pig is held in high regard, and modern autopsy has discovered also that they were also a part of their daily diet. But when God took the children of Israel out of Egypt, led by Moses into the promised land, He reintroduced the clean and unclean animal system of the pre-flood world and instructed them not to eat pig. Leviticus chapter 11 and verse 7 says, "And the swine or pig, though he divide the hoof and be cloven-footed, yet he cheweth not the cud, he is unclean unto you." Many have tried to compare the Egyptian religion with the Bible, when the two are totally the opposite. But more scientific discoveries and breakthroughs through autopsies and CT scans are showing that though the Egyptians may have looked good looking on their papyri, wall paintings and on their sarcophagus, they suffered the same diseases we have today. And what they have discovered is that the top killer disease in ancient Egypt was cardiovascular, heart disease. And when they checked the arteries of these mummified remains, they discovered that they were clogged, and this was as a result of either their diet or their lifestyle. And these are mummies from all over Egypt in different dynasties. But in thousands of years, has modern man learned from the past, or is the same disease afflicting our bodies? According to the World Health Organization, the 4 main NCDs or natural causes diseases are cardiovascular or heart-related diseases. Nothing has changed. According to Global Heart, the official journal of the World Heart Federation, cardiovascular disease and obesity are now becoming leading causes of morbidity and mortality in low and middle income countries. But it's not just low and middle income countries. Heart disease, which includes heart disease, stroke, and other cardiovascular disease, is the #1 cause of death in the United States, killing nearly 787,000 people alone in 2011. In Britain, heart disease is the UK's biggest killer, but it doesn't have to be. Is there a way of avoiding the disease of Egypt that once dominated that culture of North Africa? Of course there is. Before you consult a doctor, first speak to relatives and ask them what is the most common cause of death on that specific side of the family, as the narrator has done. Then, to break the cycle, lifestyle and diet has to change. And as the narrator is neither a doctor nor a health consultant, it is advisable that you seek advice by someone who can school you in the best way to avoid getting heart disease. But there is another disease that is afflicting mankind, and it is a result of what takes place in the mind. It is depression. And according to the World Health Organization, depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide and is a major contributor to the overall global burden of disease. There are many symptoms that lead to depression, but there is one powerful remedy that can help you to avoid going there: forgiveness. And medical studies have shown that forgiving others can protect you from depression, which will also help you from getting disease if you're not harboring grudges that sometimes are held from childhood. Forgiveness has powerful healing properties, and from the narrator's own experience, when you let go everything and give it to the Lord, the burdens and the weight just goes. This is a true balm in Gilead that heals the broken heart. And when you see people in life looking very sad and down, a lot of the times it is things they are holding in their heart that they just will not let go of. But forgiveness is not always easy. If you ever want to preach a sermon and get no response whatsoever from the congregation, then preach a sermon on forgiveness. The church will be so silent that you will hear your own heart beating very clearly, and you will realize that professed Christians are holding on to hurt and pain and will not let go, and it is at present damaging the churches. Jesus taught self-denial, humility, and forgiveness, which is central. But you can only forgive someone who has hurt you with divine assistance. You cannot do it in your own strength. A very serious question was asked of Jesus. Then came Peter to him and said, "Lord, How oft or often shall my brother sin against me, and I shall forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus saith unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. Jesus also instructs us how to pray. And when you stand praying, what should you do? Forgive. If you have aught or any issues against any, that your Father also, which is in heaven, may forgive your trespasses. But if ye do not forgive, neither will your Father, which is in heaven, forgive your trespasses. Mark chapter 11, verses 25 and 26. Did you know that what you allow your mind to focus on can affect the very cells and organs in your body, whether for positive or for negative? The famous proverb says, For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. And our bodies can release different hormones depending on what we dwell on. Harvard Health Publications did a study on what causes depression, and it showed that stress really affects the body. They observed that when a physical or emotional threat looms, the hypothalamus secretes corticotropin-releasing hormone, CRH, which has the job of arousing your body. Hormones are complex chemicals that carry messages to organs or groups of cells throughout the body and trigger certain responses. CRH follows a pathway to your pituitary gland where it stimulates the secretion of adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, which pulses into your bloodstream. When ACTH reaches your adrenaline glands, it prompts the release of cortisol. CRH also affects the cerebral cortex, part of the amygdala and the brainstem. It is thought to play a major role in coordinating your thoughts and behaviors, emotional reactions, and involuntary responses. Working along a variety of neural pathways, it influences the concentration of neurotransmitters throughout the brain. Disturbances in hormonal systems therefore may well affect neurotransmitters and vice versa. Recent medical studies have confirmed the reliability of the gospel concerning forgiveness. For when you harbor bitterness, it can lead to mental illness, and it can also lead to diseases. And when you hold on to these things, it just eats you up from the inside. It has been labeled as post-traumatic embitterment disorder. But it is not just Christians who struggle with or reject the divine principle of forgiveness that can heal the problems of this world. The world's most influential and powerful storyteller also teaches the planet not to forgive, but always to take revenge.
Threaten my people with slavery and death.
This is madness!
Madness. This is Sparta!
You have offended my family, and you have offended the Shaolin Temple.
You talking to me? You talking to me? You talking to me?
There's no politics here, it's just good old-fashioned revenge.
So you seek revenge?
I seek righteousness, but I'll take revenge.
You can clearly see the struggle between the teachings of Jesus Christ, where the Lord instructs us to forgive. That helps to heal domestic, social, and religious conflicts, and has also been verified by scientific studies that it is a powerful healing tool. But with a so-called global war on terror that is apparently based upon revenge, and with Hollywood and the video game industry fanning the flames of hatred, it will be a struggle to have any form of reconciliation or healing if people are not willing to forgive, especially with one of the most unresolved issues of modern times, the Atlantic slave trade. 2 centuries after slavery was abolished in the Caribbean and the Americas, the topic is still contentious. The continent of Europe and Africa would never remain the same again, and forgiveness and reconciliation looks almost impossible. Many whites suffer with a post-slavery guilt complex and get very agitated and defensive when the topic is presented to them. Many blacks are still psychologically bound to the strongholds and spiritual chains and bondage of the past, and find it very difficult to let go and cannot articulate themselves effectively without getting aggressive when the topic is also raised. And this article in the New York Times in 2010 shows that both blacks and whites do not want to take responsibility for that horrible, inhumane traffic. After 2 centuries, blacks want reparations, and anyone with common sense knows it will cause a rift. A vast majority of white Americans say there should not be reparations for African American descendants of slaves, but more than half of blacks say it's a good idea, and Hispanics are almost evenly split, according to a new poll. And it is getting so contentious that even the United Nations says that African Americans should receive reparations for slavery. Slave descendants in the Caribbean have also petitioned their case to the United Nations for reparations. And in the UK, many blacks marched to Parliament Square to demand reparations. In the United States, Democratic Senator Bernie Sanders said that blacks shouldn't get any reparations at all, who is totally against it. One man, if he was alive today, would probably have agreed with him. His name is Marcus Mosiah Garvey Jr. Many blacks see him as the icon of black nationalism and racial pride, but it is quite obvious that they haven't read his philosophy. Garvey knew that if blacks were totally dependent on state handouts from whites or any other race, no one will respect them at all, and he would definitely blast those marching and debating about reparations and would see them as an embarrassment to the race. He taught that blacks should develop their own level of economic independence, and by helping themselves, other races would show them a better level of respect. And this is what he had to say. God Almighty created each and every one of us for a place in the world. And for the least of us to think that we were created only to be what we are and not what we can make ourselves is to impute an improper motive to the Creator for creating us. There is no sense in hate. It comes back to you. Therefore, make your history so laudable, magnificent, and untarnished that another generation will not seek to repay your seed for the sins inflicted upon their fathers. The thing for the Negro to do, therefore, is to adjust his own economic present in readiness for the future. A race that is solely dependent upon another for its economic existence, soon or later dies, as we have in the past been living upon the mercies shown us by others and by the chances obtainable and have suffered therefrom. So will we in the future suffer if an effort is not made now to adjust our own affairs. As reparations is a bit of a joke, and anyone who has any level of common sense should know that a world that still has not recovered from an economic crisis is going to start dishing out loads of money to blacks is living in cuckoo world and needs to come out of the wonderland with Alice. If healing and reconciliation is going to take place, then we have to look at the effects of slavery and the impact it has left on the modern world and how we can move forward. Anthony Greenwald is a professor of psychology at the University of Washington and was undergoing some experiments. He was joined by another psychologist, Mahzarin Banaji, professor of social ethics at Harvard University, and they conducted a study called Implicit Bias: Scientific Foundations, where they tested how people responded to how they view other races, and the nature of unconscious social cognition and its pervasive influence on human affairs. And through these IAT tests, they were both unaware how very deep-rooted their own racial prejudices were. The IATs, or implicit association tests, consist of using a number of words like sunshine, peace, love, beauty, joy, etc., and compare them with words like murder, bomb, hate, rape, devil, etc. Whenever a face of a white person appeared on the computer screen, people, that is whites and Asians, always hit the positive words like beauty, sunshine, joy, and peace. But when a black face was on the screen, the negative words of hate, murder, evil, rape, etc. were automatically hit by the participant. Many blacks will say this is a clear reflection of the prejudice of Asians and whites towards blacks. But guess what? Blacks had the same negative response to their own race when they saw the image on a screen, which shows how deeply rooted blacks suffer with self-hatred, unconsciously unaware of it. Now, the narrator does not walk with blinders on, and is fully aware of the effects of slavery on both blacks and whites. These young black men in London, England are being stopped and searched by white policemen in 2011. The photo in the centre shows a black man being stopped and searched in Notting Hill in West London in 1958, which shows that nothing has really changed. There is still a deep-rooted plantation mentality in authority. And since 9/11 in the United States and 7/7 in the UK, not Muslims or Asians, but blacks are still the highest to be stopped and searched in the UK. And though they barely make up 3% of the UK population, they are 3 times more likely to be tasered by the police than any other racial group. Black pupils are 3 times more likely to be expelled from schools than any other racial group. And black adults are 3 times as likely to be admitted to a mental health hospital. So there are some clear injustices, and these also include gentrification. And though this affects all communities no matter what colour they are, many are aware that once predominantly black neighbourhoods are now becoming dominated by affluent middle-class whites, not only in the United Kingdom, but in the United States also, where blacks are being removed from their neighbourhoods, and some would even call it ethnic cleansing, and communities that once flourished are now non-existent. So the narrator is fully aware of the deep political and psychological aftermath of slavery. But the question is, how do you heal? There is a reason why blacks want reparation, and for those who have no idea why they are scattered throughout North and South America, the Caribbean and Europe, it is because of slavery. And as blacks know that the entire modern world was built on the forced labour of blacks, they feel that everyone has reaped the benefits but them. But the narrator feels it is important to give a brief history on how the economic infrastructure of the modern world was developed and how we can move forward.
Free State of Jones.
Moses, what are you?
Free man, Captain.
Sure is.
Newton Knight, who this film was about, was a Southern Unionist. They were white people living in the Confederate States of America who were opposed to secession and against the Civil War. He formed an alliance with slaves and set up a mixed-race community of blacks and whites in southeastern Mississippi where everyone was equal. Just before him, abolitionist John Brown was way more radical. He is famous for the failed insurrection, an attack on Harper's Ferry in 1859, where he led a group of slaves to revolt. He is a hero among African Americans, but many of his methods are very questionable. His radical uprising was one of the many factors that led to the US Civil War. But what was the Civil War over? The typical narrative is that almost 1 million men died between 1861 to 1865 to free black slaves. That to the narrator never really made sense, and one always wanted to get to the root of that war. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, is usually presented as the godfather of the emancipation of blacks in North America, and we are usually led to believe that he had the slaves' self-interest at heart, but that's not really the case. He wrote a letter to Horace Greeley, the founder and editor of the New York Tribune, and this letter clearly shows Abraham Lincoln's position in 1862. He said, "My paramount object in this struggle is to save the Union, and it is not either to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. What I do about slavery and the colored race, I do because I believe it helps to save this union. And what I forbear because I do not believe it would help to save the union. Recent evidence from British archives shows that Abraham Lincoln wanted to deport the slaves to British colonies to make North America more racially pure. But what was the war really about? The most dominant casual item of clothing we wear today are jeans. When the narrator walks the streets of London, one observed that if a jeans company was to ever go bust, you would scratch your head and really have to question its marketing strategy. But what are jeans made from? Denim, which is from cotton. Cotton in the 19th century is equivalent to what oil is in the 21st century, products that keep the global market flowing. And who would ever guess that the root cause of the US Civil War was cotton, a product that was introduced into the United States by American inventor Eli Whitney, best known for his invention of the cotton gin. And Civil War historians are confirming that it was cotton that was the root. Secularists are very quick to blame religion on all wars, when it is quite clear that they overlook the other factors. This product was nicknamed in the southern states as King Cotton, where the majority was grown, but it was the slave labor of blacks that kept the plantations flowing. And if blacks were to be free and no longer be forced laborers, it would definitely affect the economics of the South. The evidence is now leaking out that the cotton industry affected global trade, and when Abraham Lincoln ordered a blockade of the South in order to turn off supplies from entering or leaving southern ports, Egypt rose up and became a leading supplier of cotton to the European markets. But in New York in 1863, you had the famous draft riots, a response to Abraham Lincoln drafting people into the war, where white Irish mobs took out their frustration on innocent blacks, where they butchered and lynched blacks on the streets of New York. There were many different factors that led to that racial uprising, and we shall go into them in a while. But why was New York, a state that abolished slavery, so hostile to conscription? There is a reason. The event has gone down in history as the draft riots, but trouble had been brewing long before the draft began. In the decades preceding the war, large numbers of New Yorkers, workers, businessmen, bankers, newspaper editors, and politicians had been adamantly pro-South and pro-slavery. Long after slavery was abolished in the state of New York, the city's economy was as dependent on it as any plantation owner was. The gigantic international trade in southern cotton was the key. New York banks financed the spread of cotton plantations across the Deep South. New York merchants sold plantation owners their supplies. New York's mayor in 1863, George Opdyke, had made a fortune selling them cheap clothing they provided slaves. Cotton accounted for a whopping 40% of the shipping in New York Harbor. The city's hotels, restaurants, and entertainment venues filled up every summer with southern visitors. So we can see that the issue was cotton, and slave labor was central in maintaining it, and one of the key financial centers of the world, New York, was financially built up because of it. There is also an article in the New York Times that gives one of the best accounts of the Cotton War, better known as the US Civil War. The year before Lincoln's election, the South accounted for 70% of American exports, the great majority of it cotton. Aside from the pragmatism and self-interest that drove the trade, there was also a humanitarian impulse. Put simply, cotton sales in the occupied regions were the principal means by which destitute whites, including those loyal to the Union, and former slaves, avoided starvation. Owing to the poverty left behind as Confederates withdrew from western Tennessee, General Halleck resolved that the cotton trade was a matter of extreme necessity. And there was no getting around the fact that the North desperately needed cotton itself. The historian Lauriston Bullard wrote Massachusetts was almost as much dependent upon cotton as South Carolina or Mississippi. The demand was ravenous. 2 weeks before the Union captured Memphis, a major cotton port on the Mississippi River, 18 New England textile manufacturers petitioned Congressman Samuel Hooper of Massachusetts to re-establish trade there. The Bay State's colorful Edward Atkinson, variously a prominent abolitionist, cotton mill industry leader and weapon supplier to John Brown, persuaded Lincoln to liberalize between the lines trading. Later in the war, Atkinson urged that New Englanders be given Texas lands to raise cotton, utilizing former slaves for labor. To questions about whether ex-slaves would accept the scheme, he answered that if they declined, they should be allowed to starve, and so remove the Negro question, but still we must have cotton. So for those who believe that the North wanted slaves free, that's a deception. This so-called abolitionist Edward Atkinson wanted to keep the slave trade going, but he wasn't the only one. The narrator was born, raised and lives in the UK, and the English are renowned worldwide of secretly meddling in world conflicts, and many times coming out undetected. The UK at present is the world's second largest arms supplier. Its infamous BAE Systems is ranked among one of the world's leading defense weapons contractors or arms companies. One of its top customers is the US Pentagon, the headquarters of the United States Department of Defense, where it is a leading or one of the top suppliers, and as of October 2016, it has won a $680 million US defense contract with the Pentagon. London was a leading player during the Atlantic slave trade. But where did Confederate soldiers in the South get their arms from during the US Civil War, as well as soldiers in the Union in the North? At Enfield Lock, in the London Borough of Enfield in North London, a 10 to 15 minute walk from the station, you will come to Enfield Island Village. One of the roads is called Gunner Drive within the village. As you walk to the island centre, you walk down the side of Tesco's, and behind it is an estate that was once a former factory that sold arms, the Royal Small Arms Factory. It was these factories that fueled the US Civil War between 1861 to 1865. And the official website of the London Army Company, it tells us that it was established in 1856, and only those arms produced at the London Army Company and at the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield Lock, the British National Armoury, were manufactured with Bradley bands during the American Civil War. Caleb Hughes, a major in the Confederate Army, was the arms supplier for the Confederate Army, where he imported rifles from England. And this photo shows a Confederate soldier with an Enfield rifle in his hand, shipped all the way from England, which was the second most widely used infantry weapon in the war, that was used by both the North and the South. And these dead Confederate soldiers in the trenches have with them their Enfield rifles, the gun, all the way from North London. It is now being confirmed that the English did supply arms to the Confederates. What did they have to gain? Why were they interested in a war across the Atlantic? The official website of the BBC gives us a reason why the English had a stake in that war. By the time the American Civil War started in 1861, Lancashire was the workshop of the world. Its 440,000 cotton workers spinning and weaving in 2,400 factories were as vital to the world economy as the Chinese region of Guangdong is today. Lancashire's main source of cotton was where? The Confederate States. 1.1 billion pounds a year were being shipped to Liverpool up various canals and railways to be processed in the small coal and cotton towns of the region. But the English had a far more deeper role in the Civil War than most historians are willing to admit. So deep that it is fair to say they had the greatest impact. In what ways was Britain invested or really tied up in the war? At the beginning of the war, cotton impacted the livelihoods of 1 in 5 Englishmen in some way. Everyone was worried that the cotton embargo would destroy Britain's financial might. But it turned out that there was a huge cotton glut in 1860. There was too much cotton in England in warehouses, and it was bringing down the price of finished goods. So what the war did was rescue Britain from a serious industrial slump that was about to take place. For the first 18 months of the war, British merchants just used up the cotton they had stored. Then, finally, when the cotton became scarce, truly scarce midway through the war, there were other sources of cotton coming from India and Egypt. By then, Britain had become completely invested in the war because of the war economy. Guns, cannons, rifles, bullets, uniforms, steel plating of all kind, engines, everything that a war needs. Britain was able to export to the north and to the south. In fact, Britain's economy grew during the Civil War. So just from a financial point of view, Britain was heavily invested industrially. Second of all, Britain was heavily invested because of the bonds. Both the South and the North needed to sell bonds on the international market to raise money to fight the war. The British were the largest holder of these bonds. So wars are not over religion, but about profit, geopolitics, and the control over others. But there was a religion who also wanted their cut of this war: Papal Rome. And she also played a role in slavery. But because she is very clever at covering her tracks, knowing full well that most historians, politicians, religious leaders, or journalists will not challenge her, the papacy's role in world history is always kept very quiet. But the president of the most powerful and influential educational institution, the Jesuit-run Georgetown, recently apologized for the Jesuits' role in the slave trade.
We must acknowledge that Georgetown University participated in the institution of slavery. There were slaves here on this hilltop until emancipation in 1862, and we received funds from the Society of Jesus following the sale of 272 enslaved children, women, and men from Jesuit plantations in southern Maryland.
So the Jesuits, the sons of Loyola, had their stake in the slave trade, earning profits to economically boost papal profits. And it was under Thomas F. Mulledy, the 15th president of Georgetown University, that the keeping of slaves was operating to finance the institution. But the Jesuits were more involved than people are aware of. In a very rare book titled Slavery and Catholicism by Richard Roscoe Miller, where many have told the narrator they have found great difficulty getting a hold of a copy, it records how heavily involved Jesuits were in slavery. Louis XIV reigned until 1715. Thus we see that France's colonization in Louisiana was during the reign of a Catholic king who was strong enough to be the arbiter of the destinies of Europe. It should be remembered that into Louisiana, founded as it was by the Catholic French people, the hideous institution of slavery was introduced and supported by sovereign, church, and people alike. The Catholic Encyclopedia says, it was the Jesuits, an order of Catholic priests, who in 1751 introduced the sugarcane into Louisiana from Hispaniola. In connection with this, let us remember that the production of sugar increased the desire for Negroes. But the papacy also had a role in the US Civil War to take advantage of the divisions between the North and the South, and to provoke the race issue, where one of the oldest tribal conflicts, the English-Irish Catholic-Protestant hostility, continued in the United States.
Now, son, who's that?
Saint Michael.
Who is it?
Saint Michael.
And what did he do?
He cast Satan out of paradise.
Goodbye.
On my challenge, we have met at this chosen ground.
The earth turns,
To settle for who holds sway over the 5 points.
but we don't feel it move.
Us natives or the foreign hordes defiling it?
Your father tried to carve out a corner in this country for his tribe. That war is 1,000 years old and more. We never expected it to follow us here. This will all be finished tomorrow.
No, it won't.
On your order, Val.
In a book written in the mid-1980s titled The Vatican-Moscow-Washington Alliance by Aaron Manhattan, he documents how the Vatican used a clever power of diplomacy to manipulate both the North and the South for her own self-interest. In another instance of the Church's efforts to artfully aid the South, the hierarchy was active sub rosa in the mobilization of American Catholics against the military machine of the North. This was done by organizing the Great Draft Riots in New York. Being the master of indirect covert manipulation, the Church employed racial and other factors to achieve its objectives. Here it promoted the real or imagined grievances of the Irish by mobilizing them against conscription of men deemed necessary for the urgent strengthening of the Union forces. By the swipe of a pen, the Catholic clergy influenced 3/4 of Irish to desert their ranks that would influence the direction in the North. Just prior to the war, a slave named Dred Scott tried to plead for his freedom, and the Irish Roman Catholic judge, Chief Justice Roger Brooke Taney, said, "Negroes have no rights which the white man is bound to respect," and this judge denied him his freedom. It was the French Roman Catholic Confederate soldier, General Beauregard, who fired the very first shot in the US Civil War at Fort Sumter on the 12th of April 1861. Southern secessionist John Surratt, who was wanted for the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, was also a Roman Catholic who was found hiding, guess where? Among the papal Suaves, the army of Pope Pius IX. His mother, Mary Surratt, was a Roman Catholic, and the first woman to be executed by the United States federal government for giving a safe haven for the Lincoln assassin. It was Irish-American Archbishop John Hughes who whipped up the Irish into a racial frenzy to attack blacks in New York that also included an orphanage. It was known as the famous Draft Riots of 1863 that has been already mentioned, that created a deep-rooted hostility between blacks and Irish in North America. This was documented in a book called 50 Years in the Church of Rome by an ex-French-Canadian Roman Catholic priest, Charles Chiniquy, a book highly discredited by the Vatican. The black orphanages were brutally attacked, which shows their racial hatred ran so deeply that they didn't even have any regards for children. It took the 9th Regiment to control the anarchy in New York. And as blacks see that the Western world was built upon the forced labor of their forefathers, that's why they want reparations. 2 centuries later, the United States of America still hasn't dealt with the race issue. And when a young lone gunman went into a church and shot innocent blacks to death at a prayer meeting, it would have helped to spark a race war. But the reaction of churchgoers was totally different to what people expected.
You hurt a lot of people, but God forgive you, and I forgive you.
You know, I forgive you and my family forgive you.
We are the family that love built. We have no room for hate, so we have to forgive.
It was what none of us expected, but what all of us hope we're capable of.
And you can only forgive with God's divine strength, and the power of forgiveness can heal when many are preparing for war. There are still people who seek to provoke the issue of race, and even at the door at times receive messages of people who try to whip up racial hostility. But the narrator is a follower of Jesus Christ, and if the Son shall make you free, you shall be free indeed. When the narrator sees comments of this nature, you just feel sorry for them. That is their pain they are projecting online. You just pray for them and leave them to the Lord. For Exodus chapter 14 and verse 14 says, "The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace." And when you just let God fight your battles for you in this spiritual warfare, Psalm 119 and 165 says, "Great peace have they which love thy law, and nothing shall offend them." And one of the ways you can avoid to not be offended is when thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee. Isaiah chapter 26 and verse 3. And anyone who professes to be a Christian and lives a life of constant warfare, God said to number 1, follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. And number 2, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. I know for many it can be very difficult when people are provoking you. But God said, if it be possible. I know sometimes it can be very hard, but if it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. To summarize this study, many, especially in the black community, are running back to the pagan culture of Egypt, being totally unaware that the top diseases that afflicted the Egyptians are the same diseases that are afflicting mankind today, due to their diet and lifestyle. Unforgiveness is killing communities and individuals, where it also leads to many different diseases. And if you do not understand the past, you will not be able to understand the present and be healed from unresolved rifts. As the narrator always advises, please research everything that is presented. And if you are having difficulties in finding books in these studies, the best website where you can get nearly any out-of-print book is ABE Books. They practically do everything. God bless. Feel free to subscribe to the Even at the Doors YouTube channel, where you'll receive regular videos. And you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter by clicking on the links below. I would just like to thank all those who have sent donations that have kept this ministry afloat. And if you would like to continue to support this work, also click on the link below. If you would like to see this work spread even further, you have permission to distribute this video for non-commercial or commercial use on the condition that you do not add or take away from the content of this study. Thank you.